Weapons in space. Quote, "And we have vowed that we shall not see it governed by a hostile flag of conquest, but by a banner of freedom and peace. We have vowed that we shall not see space filled with weapons of mass destruction, but instruments of knowledge and understanding. Yet the vows of this nation can only be fulfilled if we in this nation are first, and we intend to be first." End quote. President John F. Kennedy, in his "We Choose to Go to the Moon" speech, September 12, 1962. "In the beginning," starts the famous opening line in Genesis from the Old Testament of the Holy Bible, setting the scene for the creation of life on earth. The tone changes in Genesis 19:24 when it says, quote, "Then the Lord rained down on Sodom and Gomorrah brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven." End quote. This passage describes what is remarkably similar to the debate over weapons in space. Proponents of the ancient astronaut theory argue there are many references, biblical and other sources, to high-tech warfare as waged from above in prehistory. If only we had kept true to the vision John F. Kennedy proposed in the beginning of the space race to the moon. The first acknowledged space weapon of the modern age was Nazi Germany's V-2 rocket, which terrorized the Allies at the end of World War II. The V-2 was designed by the infamous rocket scientist Wernher von Braun, who would escape from Germany to America and become known as the father of the American space program. On his deathbed in 1977, Wernher von Braun told his confidant, Dr. Carol Rosen, that when the U.S. starts placing weapons in space, it will be based on a lie. He told her at first the reason would be to defend against the Russians, who were still a threat at that time. Next, he said, the threat would be terrorists operating from third world countries, now called rogue nations. Third, there will be the threat of rogue asteroids, and this will be the strong justification for putting weapons into space. The last card, von Braun emphasized over and over, is that the U.S. military would use invading extraterrestrial aliens as a threat. Quote, there is going to be a spin to find some enemy against whom we have to build space-based weapons, he said, except it's all based on a lie, end quote. These space-based weapons will be up and running before the rest of the world knows why they are there, warned Wernher von Braun. Interestingly, it is not documented whether he said explicitly that the need for space weapons is a lie, or that false flag enemies and events, Russians, third world terrorists, rogue asteroids, alien attacks, are the lies used to persuade the public there is a need for a secret space program, including weapons in outer space. Changes on the geopolitical chessboard. Until very recently, the United States has dominated global hegemony. However, a swiftly changing world situation is taking place while Washington's economic and political influence is declining, even as it remains the unmatched military superpower. America suffers from low growth, extreme indebtedness, imperial overreach abroad, and virtual political paralysis at home. At the same time, we are spending $1 trillion a year on wars of choice, maintaining the Pentagon military machine, and initiating and expanding various other national security projects. The world's four main emerging economic powers, Brazil, Russia, India, and China, have been known by the acronym BRIC. And now, with the inclusion of South Africa in 2010, refer to themselves as the BRICS. This is a development of geopolitical significance, and it has no doubt intensified frustrations in Washington, which has been concerned about the growing economic and political strength of the BRICS countries for several years. Given the volatile global crisis with peak oil, climate change, continued U.S. imperial wars, grave poverty that will increase as world populations grow from 7 billion today to over 9 billion in 2050, and many emerging countries seeking a rightful share of world leadership, there is a very good chance the United States could in time resort to global military aggression to sustain its dominant status, possibly even starting or provoking World War III. Considering the U.S. political system's decades-long move towards the right, the enormity of the Pentagon's arsenal, the militarism in our society, and the ability of Washington and the corporate mass media to collaborate in selling wars to a misinformed public, provoking a world conflict cannot be ruled out. It also cannot be ruled out that the USA has advanced space weapons and a secret space program in operation for decades that could unleash untold havoc on any perceived enemy. Not long after von Braun passed away in 1977, the saber-rattling President Ronald Reagan, who threatened to bury the Soviet Union's communist bear, brought Star Wars to the world's center stage. Star Wars was actually a moniker given to the Strategic Defense Initiative, that's SDI. Did Reagan always want an anti-missile shield in space, or was he simply following a plan set in motion long before he became president? Peace activists then and now called SDI missile defense the grand deception, the big lie, perhaps the greatest sham of all time. The true purpose of this arms program, critics believe, is to control and dominate space, because whoever controls space will control the earth. Ronald Reagan softened his stance against the Soviet threat during his second term. He is the only president, other than Jimmy Carter, to admit publicly that he'd seen a flying saucer. Reagan was also the only president to hypothesize, albeit metaphorically, about the possibility of hostile extraterrestrials posing a threat to Earth. In a December 4th, 1985 speech at Falston High School in Maryland, President Reagan spoke about his 5-hour private discussion with General Secretary Mikhail Gorbachev the previous month in November 1985. He relayed to the class, quote, how much easier his task in mind might be in these meetings that we held if suddenly there was a threat to this world from another species, from another planet outside in the universe. We'd forget all the little local differences that we have had between our countries, and would find out once and for all that we really are all human beings here on this earth together, end quote. Similarly, Gorbachev said in a speech on February 16, 1987, in the Grand Kremlin Palace in Moscow, quote, at our meeting in Geneva, the U.S. President said that if the Earth faced an invasion by extraterrestrials, the United States and the Soviet Union would join forces to repel such an invasion. I shall not dispute this hypothesis, though I think it's early yet to worry about such an intrusion, end quote. Gorbachev also remarked, quote, "The phenomenon of UFOs does exist, and it must be treated seriously," end quote. Peace in outer space. Is it possible for the human race to leave war out of space as Kennedy envisioned? Can space be used for peaceful purposes only? The 1967 Outer Space Treaty outlaws weapons of mass destruction to be deployed in space or on celestial bodies, but not weapons of selective destruction, such as nuclear-powered battlestats, according to Bruce Gagnon. Bruce Gagnon directs the Global Network Against Weapons and Nuclear Power in Space from his office in Maine. The Global Network's aim is to stop any weaponization in space, along with any nuclear-powered technology ever being deployed past Earth's atmosphere and into space. He established the Global Network in 1992, and today it is considered one of the fastest-growing peace activist groups around the globe, with chapters in 170 countries. Quote, "The U.S. has made no secret of the fact that it considers space to be the military high ground," Gagnon stated. "If you ever master space, you can control the world," end quote. The USA is already calling itself the master of space. Indeed, the U.S. Space Command at Peterson Air Force Base in Colorado already refers to itself as such. Other nations will react by considerably increasing their arsenals, and many treaties will be broken or be at risk. How long will it be before weapons are stationed in space? Those that can be aimed at any target anywhere on Earth. How long before the Star Wars fantasy becomes a grim reality? It would seem already, especially after two massive explosions in Tianjin, China in August 2015, which alternative media outlets declared was waged with the Rod of God, or Project Thor space weapon, as an act of kinetic retaliation by the Pentagon in response to China's currency war, yuan devaluation. Once given the launch command, a Thor satellite would drop a pole, which would then speed up until going at orbital velocity around 10 miles a second. At this speed, when it hit a ground-based target, it would have the explosive equivalent of a small-yield nuclear weapon without a radiation signature, and would also have tremendous penetrating power because of its long, thin profile. If a Thor pole was dropped on China, it would mark the first shot fired in the meta-planetary war. What is clear is that weapons in space are considered a global taboo by scores of nations. This likely is because many countries will never have the know-how or the money to build such weapons to counter China, the US, and Russia. For several decades now, the UN has tried to help broker anti-space weapon treaties, but during the 2000s, the US brushed them off. In fact, the Bush administration unilaterally withdrew from the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty, originally made in 1972 with the former Soviet Union. The treaty's intention was to limit missile defense, such as deploying anti-ICBM, that is intercontinental ballistic missile technology, called battlestats, into space. In the 21st century, the U.S. military, especially the Air Force and the U.S. Space Command, along with their partners in the U.S. aerospace industry, have probably reached the point of no return. In 2005, the Bush administration voted to block a UN resolution to ban actual space weapons. It was the first time the U.S. had voted that way. To the rest of the world, it certainly looked as if America was going to break one of humankind's greatest taboos. Precursors of space weaponry. Currently, space is militarized with spy satellites, but space is not weaponized with the next generation of battlestats or killer satellites loaded with lasers or missiles. It is believed that there are no battlestat weapons in space now, but there are weapons on the ground that have the proven capability of destroying targets in space. Putting weapons into space or creating weapons that can destroy targets in space is the arms race for the 21st century, say experts. It's an arms race that was reignited by the Bush administration with huge budgets directed to the U.S. aerospace industry. Big players are also China and, to a lesser degree, Russia. Building constellations of battlestats, for example, could mean hundreds of billions of dollars more pumped into the aerospace industry. What this means is that the U.S. military will someday soon be able to maneuver a satellite over a target anywhere on the Earth's surface and then melt it with a powerful laser or particle beam weapon. Some in the 9/11 Truth Movement, such as Dr. Judy Wood, say this is what was used to pulverize the Twin Towers. Beyond laser and particle beam weapons in space, there is also evidence for a network of near-Earth orbiting satellites to be deployed that are run by artificial intelligence, which are nano-satellites that have their own defensive capabilities. The Pentagon insists, according to their spokespeople, that it is not researching space weapons. It is researching missile defense. Thus, according to the Pentagon, there's no need for a space weapons treaty. The 28 NATO member states are all supposed to be working together as partners in defense. But in NATO, it is well established that the USA is first among equals. The rest follow along obediently. Missile defense is a Trojan horse, a hollow, deceptive program, because the Pentagon has nothing to show for all the money it has spent, says Gagnon. What it's getting for spending $120 billion is dual-use technology, he noted. Instead of taxpayers' dollars being put into building new roads and bridges and remodeling countless schools, funding is being given to the Pentagon to create an arsenal of space weapons. Despite 1 in 6 Americans living in poverty, cost-cutting social programs to the bone, and even slashing PBS funding, Congress has no problem pledging to renew America's commitment to missile defense, even in opposition to nearly every other nation in the world. Yet, officially, the U.S. military's anti-satellite program does not exist. But many experts agree the U.S. has been secretly testing anti-satellite capabilities under the mask of the Star Wars missile defense for decades. At the moment, the U.S. Missile Defense Agency is working on 12 separate programs some of which are ready to be deployed and can take out targets in space. The Terminal High Altitude Area Defense, that's THAAD, T-H-A-A-D, on which the Pentagon has spent $120 billion, is just one of many programs, and that's just the unclassified spending. Countless man-hours have been devoted to a weapons program that has not really produced anything of value to the civilian population or the soldiers on the battlefield. Over $120 billion have been spent since 1983, when President Reagan called for the SDI program to be developed. This is only what is acknowledged. According to the Center for Defense Information, the CDI, a Washington-based space weapons think tank, missile defense is the most expensive U.S. weapons program of all time. Lobbyist power. To fully grasp how the arms race got so hot during the late 2000s, it is important to understand a very familiar three-way partnership. Defense contractors such as Lockheed Martin and Boeing, along with Congress and the Pentagon, all depend on each other in a symbiotic relationship which expands into every corner of modern technology. This relationship has come to be known as the Eisenhower fruition, based on Dwight D. Eisenhower's present plea at the end of his presidency in 1961 to be aware of the military-industrial complex. Funding for missile defense research is centered in northern Alabama. Huntsville, Alabama is also called Rocket City, the city that Wernher von Braun built. The city claims to have 50 civilian companies working on missile defense, featuring all the giants, including Lockheed Martin. By 2010, over 6,000 missile defense scientists and researchers were working in and around Huntsville, a region of about 38,000 people. The two senators from Alabama, Republicans Richard Shelby and now Attorney General Jeff Sessions, ranked first and second when it came to receiving campaign contributions. Little surprise that the largest contributions came from Boeing and Lockheed Martin. Both senators are high-ranking members of defense-related Senate committees in charge of funding missile defense research. The aerospace industry spent millions lobbying Congress to convince office holders that there is a need for such weapons. The Pentagon, the U.S. Space Command, and the Air Force also lobby Congress, begging for funds for their new toys. It is these groups that are the driving force behind space weapons. The Rumsfeld report, released in 2000, warned that a space Pearl Harbor could cripple the nation. The report had major corporate influence. 7 of the 13 commissioners who issued the report either were currently or had worked for the aerospace industry. Secret space program. Another threat to peace in outer space is the advanced spacecraft of the USA Black Operations, advanced flying machines armed with high-tech weapons. The USA secret space program is outside the purview of Congress and by all accounts is operating illegally, yet it remains virtually invisible under the cloak of national security. Solar Warden is an ultra-secret project that maintains a fleet of spaceships that are operating within our solar system. Perhaps they're defending us against alien threats, or they're involved in a covert colonization of space. In order to send manned missions into the far reaches of our solar system, we'd need exotic materials and propulsion systems. There are at least 12 known advanced aerospace craft currently in use. The Northrop Grumman B-2 Spirit stealth bomber, the F-22 Raptor advanced stealth fighter, and its successor, the F-35 Lightning II advanced stealth fighter, the Aurora SR-33A, Lockheed Martin's X-33A, the Lockheed X-22A two-manned anti-gravity disc fighter, Boeing and Airbus Industries Nautilus, the TR-3A Pumpkin Seed, the TR-3B Astra Triangle, Northrop's Great Pumpkin Disc, Teledyne Ryan's aeronautical XH-75D Shark anti-gravity helicopter, and the Northrop Quantum Teleportation Disc. It is now believed most of these craft operate out of the new secret airbase located near Dugway, Utah. These craft utilize anti-gravity technology in one of three ways. The B-2 stealth bomber and the TR-3B Astra triangular craft both use an earlier discovered anti-gravity electrogravitic technology. This technique involves pulsating millions of volts to disrupt the ambient gravitational field. The Nautilus spacefaring craft uses magnetic pulsing, which operates by generating high-energy toroidal fields spun at incredible RPMs, which also disrupt the ambient gravitational field using a counterforce to Earth's gravitational pull to generate power. The remaining U.S. Secret Space Program craft use a more sophisticated system, a direct generation energy source that can harness the gravitational strong force. This strong force field extends slightly beyond the atomic nucleus of element 115. Geoengineering and weather manipulations. Another rapidly developing industry is called geoengineering or climate engineering. The National Academy of Sciences defines geoengineering as operations that would involve large-scale engineering of our environment in order to combat or counteract the effects of changes in atmospheric chemistry, end quote. Weather control, particularly hostile weather warfare, was addressed by the adoption of United Nations General Assembly Resolution 3172, TIAS 9614 Convention on the Prohibition of Military or any other hostile use of environmental modification techniques. The convention was signed in Geneva, Switzerland on May 18, 1977, and entered into law on October 5, 1978. Ratification was by U.S. President Jimmy Carter on December 13, 1979, and the U.S. ratification was deposited at the UN in New York on January 17, 1980. If there are laws prohibiting weather modification, then what exactly is going on in the upper atmosphere? Vigilant citizens have called attention to chemical trails in the skies, long, white, smoke-like streaks which linger for hours and then disperse into clouds. The chemtrail is different from the commercial aircraft contrail, which is a condensation trail that dissipates quickly. The traditional contrails are frozen exhausts in the form of ice and fade away almost immediately. The chemtrails, on the other hand, are long lines which linger until they disperse into a fog. Chemtrail does not refer to common forms of aerial spraying such as crop dusting, cloud seeding, skywriting, or aerial firefighting. The term specifically refers to aerial trails caused by the systemic high-altitude release of chemical substances not found in ordinary contrails, resulting in the appearance of uncharacteristic sky tracks. Chemtrails are sometimes seen sprayed into X formations, apparently designed for, quote, solar radiation management, end quote, in the upper atmosphere. Supporters of this theory speculate that the purpose of the chemical release may be for reducing global warming, weather control, biological warfare, population control, Haarp activation, or chemical warfare programs. Lab tests of rainwater falling through chemical clouds measured amounts of aluminum particles 7 times higher than federal health safety limits. Geoengineering whistleblowers claim that these trails are causing respiratory illnesses and other health problems. They are deliberately sprayed at high altitudes for purposes undisclosed to the general public in clandestine programs directed by black operation military officials. Geoengineering is performed by creating clouds in the upper atmosphere, driven by scientists, corporations, and governments intent on manipulating the global climate, controlling the weather, altering the chemical composition of our atmosphere, soil, and water, and thereby controlling human population levels. Geoengineering is touted for combating global warming. Although officials insist that these programs are only in the discussion phase, evidence is abundant that they have been underway beginning around the late 1990s. Since then, the effects on crops, wildlife, and human health have been drastic and seemingly getting worse. The worldwide chemtrail spraying operation was fully online by 1997 at the behest of Edward Teller, the brilliant and influential scientist and a staunch advocate of SDI and aerial chemical spraying. Dr. Teller also holds the dubious distinction of being the father of the hydrogen bomb. Right above our heads, in plain sight, critics say, powders and aerosols are descending from the skies, changing the flora and fauna by altering it with poison. The practice is seemingly so weird and dangerous that chemtrailing renders the motivation open to wild speculation. Could Earth be transforming into a planet fit for some other kind of life that requires aluminum or barium? Are these developments to our benefit, or perhaps for others intending to replace us? Are we and our present-day plants and animals being silently killed off by the nanoparticles of aluminum, barium, strontium, and to a lesser degree, boron and arsenic? There are also Morgellons fibers erupting from people's skin that have been linked to the widespread aerosol spraying. Additional tests are also showing larger than normal amounts of titanium in trees. It's changing the pH balance of the soil. Thus, microscopic organisms are disappearing, organic crops are growing poorly, and trees are disintegrating. Not surprisingly, food and seed monopolies like Monsanto are already using genetically modified organisms in their food crops, marketing such products as aluminum-resistant Roundup corn and soybeans. Originally touted as one solution to world hunger, respected scientific groups, including the Union of Concerned Scientists, have conducted studies which contradict such claims and even point to evidence that genetically modified foods cause health problems. Some people claim chemtrails have caused them to become ill. One theory suggests that chemtrail spraying could actually be part of a misguided eugenics program to reduce the population. After all, the CIA maintains a fleet of airplanes under the name Evergreen Air, with earthquakes and storm systems demonstrably proven to be manipulated or caused outright by powerful EMF manipulation, and our skies constantly being streaked with a chemical haze emitted by thousands of planes worldwide, one might think there would be calls for alarm, or perhaps a little public education. Yet the U.S. Congress refuses to discuss the chemtrail issue with its constituents. Rising global temperatures, increasing population, and degradation of water supplies have created broad support for the various methods of weather modification. The U.S. government has conducted weather modification experiments for over a half a century, and the military-industrial complex stands poised to capitalize on these discoveries. The most notorious program is Haarp, the High-Frequency Active Auroral Research Program. This technology can potentially trigger floods, droughts, hurricanes, and earthquakes. The scientific idea behind Haarp is to excite a specific area of the ionosphere and observe the physical processes in that excited area with the intention of modifying ecological conditions. Haarp can be used as a weapon system capable of selectively destabilizing agricultural and ecological systems of entire regions. At a recent international symposium, scientists asserted that manipulation of climate through modification of cirrus clouds is neither a hoax nor a conspiracy theory, but in fact is fully operational. A big clue regarding barium's use in the atmosphere comes from Bernard Eastlund's patent for Haarp. The array of Haarp towers are transmitters which can be used for a variety of functions, including heating the ionosphere. It has the ability to direct a steerable electromagnetic beam at the upper atmosphere and affect rainfall patterns in a particular region. Most notably, the patent calls for large clouds of barium to be released into the atmosphere. Barium, which is an immune system suppressant, is a soft, silvery, metallic, alkaline earth metal, and it would never be found in rainwater under normal conditions. Yet, barium is popping up in rainwater tests worldwide. Apparently, it is being pumped into the atmosphere in aerosols sprayed from aircraft around the world. Is this another example of stealth warfare weapons being used in a silent war against humanity? What could possibly be gained by covertly seeding the planetary atmosphere with sprayed aerosols containing bacteria, algae, various chemicals, Morgellon nanotube fibers, and heavy metal particles? Is the intention to alter the natural atmospheric processes and earth chemistries that have existed for millions of years. This is where the future esoteric narrative becomes downright frightening.